I never wanted a war. I moved to Oakridge Estates to escape chaos, not invited in. It was supposed to be peaceful, a quiet, picturesque neighborhood with neat lawns, friendly waves, and the occasional block party where people pretended they liked each other. The kind of place where people put up tasteful holiday decorations and argued over who had the best homemade chili. But Oakridge had a problem, and its name was Linda Davenport. Linda wasn't just the head of the Homeowners Association. She was the self-appointed queen, the iron-fisted ruler of this postage-stamp kingdom. With her helmet of over-processed blonde hair, pastel-colored cardigans, and an expression permanently stuck somewhere between smug satisfaction and mild constipation, she ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom. The woman had a god complex wrapped in beige slacks, and I had made the grave mistake of putting a flower box on my porch. It started with a note. A small, passive-aggressive post-it stuck right on my door like some kind of royal decree. Dear homeowner, your recent modification is out of compliance with the Oakridge Estates community standards. Please remove it immediately to avoid further action. Linda Davenport, HOA President. I laughed. A flower box. That was my crime? It was a simple wooden box filled with bright yellow marigolds, hardly a blight on the neighborhood. But I had heard stories. The horror stories of Linda's wrath, the fines, the warnings, the thinly veiled threats. Neighbors whispered about the time she forced old Mrs. Grayson to remove her bird feeder because it was allegedly attracting vermin. She once handed out citations to people who left their trash cans at the curb a minute too long. So, like a reasonable person, I ignored the note. A week later, I received the first fine. $50. I ignored that, too. Then came the second. $200. The third one was hand-delivered by Linda herself. She stood on my porch, holding a clipboard, a smug smile curling her lips as she tapped her pen against the paper. I see you've chosen to disregard my notices, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I crossed my arms. I see you've chosen to harass me over a flower box. This isn't harassment, she said sweetly. It's enforcement. If you want to live in Oakridge Estates, you have to follow the rules. That's why we have such a prestigious community. I glanced down the street. A few houses had peeling paint. One guy still had his Christmas lights up in May. Prestigious was a strong word. Linda, I sighed. It's a box of flowers. And it's unauthorized, she said, her smile tightening. If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter. I should have known better than to poke the bear. But I was feeling particularly stubborn that day. Go ahead. Her eyes flickered with something dark, something gleeful. Linda lived for this, wielding her tiny scraps of power like she was a medieval lord. Have it your way, she said, turning on her heel. 2 days later, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice nailed to my door, illegal modification. Final warning, failure to comply will result in further enforcement action. I was still staring at it when my neighbor, Dave, wandered over. He was an easygoing guy, always wearing flip-flops no matter the season. He let out a low whistle when he saw the notice. Damn, he said. She hit you with the scarlet letter. This is insane. That's Linda, he said with a shrug. You either fall in line, or she makes your life hell. I was starting to believe it. I should have backed down. I could have backed down. But that notice on my door, it felt personal. I wasn't about to let some overzealous dictator push me around over a flower box, so I made a decision. I doubled down. I added 2 more flower boxes. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of furious knocking. I opened the door to find Linda, standing there with 3 other HOA board members, all wearing matching navy blue polo shirts with the Oakridge Estates logo embroidered on the chest. One of them, a scrawny guy with wire-rimmed glasses, was actually holding a clipboard like this was some kind of official operation. Linda's expression was triumphant, her eyes glinting with the righteous fury of a woman who had spent way too much time on neighborhood bylaws. Mr. Carter, she said, voice as smooth as butter left out in the sun too long. You are in direct violation of HOA regulations, and you have refused to comply despite multiple warnings. I leaned against my doorframe. So you brought backup? She ignored that. Under Section 14, subsection C of the Oakridge Estates Covenant Agreement, you are now subject to immediate enforcement measures. Enforcement measures? Linda smiled. We're placing you under HOA detention until we can contact law enforcement. I blinked. Then I burst out laughing. Oh, that's adorable, I said. You think you have the authority to detain me? Linda's smile faltered. This is a legal action. No, it's not, I said, still chuckling. You're a homeowners association, not a police force. You have no legal authority to detain anyone. She sniffed. We have the right to enforce the community's standards. I folded my arms. Linda, do you even know what I do for a living? The smug expression on her face twitched just a little. I took a slow step forward, my voice dropping just enough to make her squirm. I'm the town marshal. A beat of silence. Then, like a perfectly choreographed routine, every single HOA enforcer took a step back. Even Clipboard Guy looked like he wanted to disappear. Linda, to her credit, tried to keep her composure, but her confidence was cracking, like cheap porcelain. That doesn't change the fact that you've broken the rules, she stammered. I smiled. Oh, I'll tell you what's broken. Your assumption that you're above the law. Linda's face went through all 5 stages of grief in about 3 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining. But she wasn't ready for acceptance. Not yet. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice low, venomous. I tilted my head. I think it is. And just like that, the battle lines had been drawn. But Linda wasn't finished, not even close. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I half expected Linda to come storming back onto my porch with some nonsense legalese about citizens' arrests or an impromptu kangaroo court hearing. But there was nothing. No fines, no new notes taped to my door. Just an eerie silence, like the pause before a tornado touches down. I should have known better than to let my guard down. Because Linda didn't just fight. She plotted. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a county inspector knocking on my door. Morning, he said, looking about as thrilled to be here as I was to see him. He adjusted his clipboard and cleared his throat. We got a complaint about unpermitted modifications to the property? I blinked. Modifications? He glanced down at his notes. Says here you built an unauthorized structure. I stared at him. You mean the flower boxes? He looked up from his clipboard. That's it? That's it. There was a long pause before he let out a sigh that carried the weight of a man who had dealt with way too many HOA disputes in his career. Mind if I take a look? I waved a hand. Be my guest. The inspector did a slow lap around my porch, barely concealing his irritation. Yeah, this is a waste of my time. I grinned. Tell me about it. Linda, of course, was watching from across the street, standing at the edge of her pristine driveway, arms folded, her eyes narrowed into slits as she glared at us. When she saw the inspector heading back toward his truck without a citation, her face went through 3 shades of rage. Excuse me, she called out, marching over. Aren't you going to issue a notice of violation? The inspector gave her a flat look. For what? He's got some flower boxes. That's not a structural modification, but it's against the HOA standards, she seethed. That's your problem, not mine. The inspector climbed into his truck, completely uninterested in whatever argument she was about to hurl at him. Linda's mouth opened, then snapped shut as the truck rumbled down the street, leaving her. Standing there, seething, I gave her a little wave. That looked embarrassing. Linda didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and stormed back to her house. That should have been the end of it. Any sane person would have dropped it. But Linda? Linda doubled down. The next week was hell. It started with the fines. A new one appeared in my mailbox every single day. $100 for excessive foliage. $250 for non-uniform exterior modifications. $500 for failure to comply with aesthetic regulations. It was comical, except it wasn't. Then came the noise complaints. Apparently my TV was too loud. My truck was a disturbance. Someone, I wonder who, filed a complaint that I was running an unlicensed business out of my garage. County officials investigated again, and again I was cleared. But Linda wasn't playing fair anymore, because the next letter I received wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. I unfolded it and skimmed the first few lines before I actually laughed. She was trying to have me evicted. I read the letter twice just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. According to Linda's fabricated version of reality, I was a habitual violator of the community standards, a public nuisance, and, my personal favorite, a disruptive and antagonistic presence contributing to the degradation of neighborhood values. All because of some flower boxes. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just being a power-hungry bureaucrat. She was unhinged. Linda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was waging war. I had a choice. I could fold, sell my house, and get the hell out of Oakridge. Or I could fight back. I chose the second option. So I did what any rational person in my position would do. I filed a formal harassment complaint against the HOA. And, because karma has a twisted sense of humor, it turned out that I wasn't the only one fed up with Linda's reign of terror. Within days, I had neighbors whispering to me in the grocery store, murmuring their own horror stories about fines, threats, and relentless nitpicking. Old Mrs. Grayson, the one she went after over the bird feeder, she told me Linda had altered HOA records to add fines that weren't even real. Dave, my neighbor, he revealed that a few years back, Linda tried to forcibly remove a family because she thought their front door was the wrong shade of beige. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Linda wasn't just a nuisance. She was corrupt. And she'd been getting away with it for years. The day after I filed the complaint, I received a summons from the county board. An official investigation into the HOA was underway. That should have been enough to make Linda back down, but instead she snapped. That evening, I pulled into my driveway and saw her standing there, waiting. Barely had time to step out of my truck before she marched over, her face twisted in an expression I hadn't seen before. Pure, unfiltered rage. You think you can just tear down everything I've built? She spat. I raised an eyebrow. Everything you've built? Linda, it's an HOA, not the Roman Empire. Her hands were trembling, whether from anger or fear. I wasn't sure. You don't know what you've done, she hissed. I own this neighborhood. These people need me. I crossed my arms. Pretty sure they don't. Her face twitched. Just for a second. A crack in the mask. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't just angry. She was terrified. For the first time in years, Linda Davenport was losing control, and she knew it. I hope you're ready, she whispered, stepping closer. Because I will ruin you before I let you win. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I grinned. You already lost. Linda opened her mouth. And then a car pulled up to the curb, a sleek black sedan, the kind that government officials drive. I turned to see two men step out, crisp suits, hard expressions. Linda froze, because she knew exactly who they were. I felt my smile widen. Well, Linda, I said, taking a slow step toward her. Looks like the county investigator would like to have a word. For the first time since this all started, Linda looked scared. The two men from the sedan stepped forward with the cool, detached authority of people who did not have time for HOA nonsense. Linda Davenport? The taller one asked, flipping open a badge. I'm Investigator Barnes with the County Oversight Committee. This is my associate, Mr. Hewitt. We're here to discuss a formal complaint regarding your management of the Oakridge Estates HOA. Linda stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This is ridiculous, she finally sputtered. This man, she jabbed a finger at me, is a known agitator. He has been harassing me for weeks. Barnes didn't so much as blink. We'll be making that determination ourselves, ma'am. But I run this community, she protested. Hewitt raised an eyebrow. Not anymore, you don't. And that's when the real unraveling began. Linda's carefully cultivated mask of smug authority cracked wide open. I have done nothing wrong, she shrieked, her voice climbing into a near hysterical pitch. Everything I've done has been for the good of this community. Without me, this place would be anarchy. Barnes turned to me unfazed. Marshal Carter, do you have a moment to speak inside? I didn't have to look at Linda to feel the way her entire body stiffened at the mention of my title. She had spent weeks trying to tear me down, and only now did she fully understand just how badly she had miscalculated. Of course, I said, easily stepping aside to let them in. Linda lunged forward, grabbing Barnes's arm. You can't just walk into his house and ignore me. Barnes sighed, extracting himself from her grip with the patience of a man who had dealt with way too many angry suburban tyrants. Ms. Davenport, he said, as of this morning, a formal inquiry has been launched into your actions as HOA president. There are allegations of fraudulent fines, altered records, and the misuse of HOA funds. We have also received multiple reports of intimidation and harassment against homeowners. Linda blanched. I watched as reality finally hit her. She had ruled with an iron fist for so long, unchecked, unchallenged, that she had never considered the possibility of losing. And now, her little empire was collapsing around her in real time. This is a conspiracy, she gasped. A witch hunt. These people are lying. Barnes didn't even flinch. Ma'am, we've already reviewed preliminary evidence. We have documentation of fines issued for violations that don't exist in the HOA charter. We have multiple affidavits from homeowners stating they were threatened with legal action over fabricated infractions. We also have bank statements indicating misappropriation of HOA funds. Linda swayed on her feet. You have no right. We have every right, Barnes said coolly. And effective immediately, you are relieved of your position as HOA president. It was over. Right there, in one breath. For the first time in 15 years, Linda Davenport was powerless. The silence stretched between us. And then she snapped. You think you can take this from me? She shrieked, her voice going shrill. I built this community. I am this community. Barnes and Hewitt didn't react. They had heard it all before. But the real kicker, the moment that sealed her fate, it came from the neighbors, because while Linda was throwing a tantrum in my driveway, people had started to gather. One by one, doors had opened, lawns had filled. I saw Dave, Mrs. Grayson, half a dozen others who had lived under Linda's reign of terror, and instead of defending her, they watched, silent, expressionless. And then someone clapped, a slow, deliberate clap, then another, and another, until the entire street erupted into cheers. Linda's face drained of color, because she finally understood no one feared her anymore. Barnes turned to her, his voice calm. We'll be following up with the HOA board regarding next steps. In the meantime, I suggest you refrain from contacting homeowners directly. Linda opened her mouth, probably to issue one last desperate plea, but Barnes was already walking away. Hewitt turned to me and handed over a folder. These are the next steps for filing a class action against the HOA if you and the other homeowners choose to pursue it. I smirked. Oh, I think we'll be pursuing it. Linda whirled on me, her face a mess of rage and desperation. You think this is funny? I met her eyes. Oh, hilarious. And with that, I turned and slammed the door in her face. 2 weeks later, an emergency HOA vote was held. Linda was officially removed. The Oakridge Estates HOA was dissolved shortly after. With Linda's iron grip gone, the community underwent an unexpected transformation. People started putting up whatever decorations they wanted. Dave built a fire pit in his backyard. Mrs. Grayson got a new bird feeder, twice the size of the last one. And as for me, I added 5 more flower boxes. Because screw Linda. Last I heard, she was trying to file a wrongful termination suit against the county. It didn't go well. Apparently, when the full audit came through, they found tens of thousands of dollars in missing HOA funds. Linda was looking at fraud charges. So much for being untouchable. The last time I saw her, she was in line at the grocery store, buying discount wine and glaring at a bag of organic kale like it had personally betrayed her. She saw me. I waved. She did not wave back, and with that, Linda Davenport finally faded into the background. Just another bitter ex-tyrant with no kingdom left to rule.